As we get into it, for anybody who doesn't know who you are, Aaron, could you just give like a quick breakdown of like your background and kind of how your journey developed from playing, coaching, all of that, and you can kind of take it from the start.
Okay. So I started playing technically tennis when I was 9. I was introduced to it actually by my mom, but it was not on purpose. I was a basketball player, so I was playing basketball since I was 2.
Yeah.
And basically, my mom was watching, it was actually in the 90s, Andre Agassi playing Pete Sampras.
Okay.
And I loved Agassi with the crazy hair and
right, the shorts.
The shorts and the hot pink clothes and stuff and the earrings. And I was like, oh, this looks pretty cool. I've never seen it before. And my mom's like, oh, it's tennis. And I never knew my mom played. So she introduced me to the game. I got started actually at a local high school that I went to school at.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Alsip, and then the school I went to was called Shepherd, which was in Palos Heights.
Okay.
And I went there. I started there first, and then I took a liking to it.
And where is that?
From here, it's probably maybe like 40 minutes away.
Okay.
Yeah, give or take or so. So south side.
So you grew up in Chicago?
Yeah, Chicago. Cool. And so basically from there, I did 1 summer doing that. So I was doing tennis and basketball, and then I also got into involved in sports and other sports as well. But I just really took a liking to the tennis portion. At the beginning, I only started playing during summertime mainly, and a little bit in indoor season, but my main focus was basketball. And then right around maybe 13 or so is when I made the full switch over. And right around that time, there's a thing called the NJTL, so National Junior Tennis League. And I was, with Arthur Ashe Foundation and they picked me up. They saw potential in me, so I got to go. When I was 13, I went to Escondido, California, and got to train for 2 weeks with a lot of USTA high performance coaches and stuff like that they had selected to train.
Was that away from your family?
Yeah, so it was the first time. So the crazy thing with that one was first time I was ever on an airplane, and it was the first time I ever was away from my parents.
Wow.
So I literally flew by myself, landed by myself, and had to find the person that was going to pick me up and take me to to the tennis facility and that. And actually, a tennis family there housed me. They were actually in San Diego, and they housed me there. So that started the journey of that. And then when I was 13, around that time, one of my first coaches, this lady, her name was Sharon Toomey. She always asked me, "Hey, would you ever want to help out sometimes?" And because I was just trying to find ways to kind of basically get more access to playing tennis. Right. So it was just my family was a working class family, and just didn't have a ton of financial. I had 2 older brothers, financial means to play.
Right, it wasn't unlimited funds.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it ended up being where she saw me teach little kids and that, and she told my parents, she's like, no matter what he does in tennis, I think he'd be an amazing coach. And then she was a special education teacher for the Chicago area and down in the city. And so that kind of started it. And then, like I said, years later, I actually played the junior circuit. And like I said, when I first came on the junior circuit, I did really well because I think a lot of guys just didn't know me because it was not someone familiar with my game style. So I came out there.
What was your game style? Back
then, it was actually trying to be like Andre Agassi. Just, kick, serve the ball in and pound people. And my favorite shot was a 2x200 backhand. And it turned into one of my coaches, I started goofing around one once in a while, hitting one-handed backhands, and I could hit him on the run and just start hitting basically outright winners.
Wow.
So then he was like, all right, I think we need to switch you. And at that time, I went from my two-handed backhand, which I copied Agassi's backhand, actually was my best shot. And so basically your confidence all in this one shot to go, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. And then also he just said, he's like, you're so athletic and good around the net. I could play the net, but it was not like I came in all the time. It was when I came in on the right time, but it was I wasn't just flooding the net. And he's like, you know what? He's like, long term, he's like, I want you to play a guy's game. And then he's like, and it's going forward and that. So you're going to serve and volley on both serves. You're going to chip and charge. You're going to come in and all this stuff. So, and then he was like, no, and by the way, he's like, you're going to lose your two-hander and do a one-hander. Because I always had a pretty good slice. Okay. That the guys when I was in juniors hated it because I could just make it kind of skid off the court. So they never could really attack me. I always had to keep lifting the ball. So I started doing that, and then through basically the rest of 14s and most of 16s, I didn't do well. Guys attacked my backhand. I wasn't that strong yet, and I could slice well, but against the bigger guys, that were, especially for me, I had to play up in each division because my birthday's in December. So back then, when you're they had different age groups, times when you turn a certain age.
Yeah.
I had to move up like almost like a year and a half earlier than usual. So I always be playing guys a year and a half older than me. And so they're more physical than me. So they would attack my backhand. But yeah.
Yeah. So question, I'm curious about like that process from switching from the two-hander to the one-hander, because I'm sure at the time, right, you're, following what your coach is, programming for you and, his expertise. So looking back now with your coaching brain of all the experience you've had now, what do you think that process was of switching you to the one-hander? Was it just like they could tell that you were just super natural with the one-hander and you were just a beast athlete, and it was just like it just looked way more natural than the other one, so they were like, okay, long term, let's build this. Now using your coaching brain, looking back, like what do you think that process was, and was there anything that you think you would have done differently, knowing everything you know now?
It's funny. It's a great question, because I reflect on that, thinking about if I would have stayed the game style that I was playing prior to him making that decision, and basically me trusting him and buying into that process,
right.
Which I think, as as a coach, that's the biggest thing, is understanding that you're always looking at what's best for the player, and sometimes they don't see it in front of them sometimes because they're just kind of living in the moment and they don't necessarily see the long projection.
The vision.
So I think for him, he had a vision for me much larger than what I was seeing right in front of me.
Right.
So I think the initial change, it was, I'm not gonna lie, it was shocking. It was hard.
How old were you when you changed to the one-hander?
I was about 14.
Okay.
So I was like 14, almost 15 years old.
Wow.
And I think it was difficult for me, because obviously I went from players that I would beat pretty consistently to then like barely beating or losing, or guys that were I was similar level, like not even close anymore. They were just pulled away. And then the guys that were really good, like the national caliber players, they would just kill me. So I had a point where I was like almost 16, where I actually almost quit the game and was going to go back to basketball. But then I like literally had the moment of like, and no one talked to me. My mom and dad were very great. They were like really supportive of like whatever my decisions were. And they just said, we want you to be happy. This is what you chose. If you want to go back to basketball, that's your choice. And I remember one morning, I literally thought about it like a whole weekend. I remember one morning, I'm like, the reason why I chose tennis over basketball, why I gave that, because I was a pretty good basketball player, was if I won, it was on me. If I lost, it was on me. I was able to be dictative of my future. Where when I was in basketball, I had a lot of great players around me, but sometimes a lot of them like to goof around a lot. And it was one of those things where at the level I played in basketball, the coach, as you know, treated everyone the same, so punishment for everyone. And it was like I was the first one to practice, I was the last one to leave. I was doing all the things I needed to do there, but yet, it was always like, you're reprimanded,
Right.
Where I was like, when I look at myself in the mirror, I'm like, at the end of the day, no matter what happens, it's on me. So I can do what I need to do and say, no matter what happens, I have no regrets. So like I just had this mindset in my head. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to give up, because if I give up, I'm really truly giving up on myself. And I'm thinking about how one of the things I learned like early on is tennis is like life. So I was like, man, if I'm giving up on this now and I'm letting this difficult situation beat me down now, this is nothing like that serious compared to like so many other things that I will face later in life.
Right.
So then I was like, I basically clawed and said, that's it. Like, I'm going to do everything I can. I don't care how many times I lose, how many times I'm on the ball machine, hitting off the wall, playing players that maybe I should be beating and I'm losing to. I'm just going to take it as I'm learning and I'm embracing the process.
Right.
So I really just changed my mindset. And I think that through that, I think also is partially, my coach's encouragement. But I think by him doing that, it made me a better player, but also a better person to be more equipped in real life. And I think that's what I've taken on now as a coach, giving to all their players. It's just thinking about it's more than just that teaching that forehand or teaching a type of style of play or tactics or whatever you're teaching the player to embrace, but also like get to know them as a person, understand like what makes them tick, and like how to push them in a positive way to realize their potential, and how it converts over to also what they might do later in life. Because a lot of the players I work with, they go on to play like a good level of college tennis, whether it's D3, D2, 1, etc. But a lot of them are not pursuing professional tennis afterwards.
Right. Totally.
So it's like what do they learn in that time that I have with them?
What are the lessons learned?
What are the lessons they're going to learn, right? And that's one thing, like, I think my thing is, and I don't know how you feel, but like, not to jump back and forth, but one of the things as a coaching side, like now looking in 30 years of doing this, is like, my greatest accomplishments as a coach isn't like the kids winning tournaments. It isn't those things. It's on them. They did it,
right.
not me.
Right.
So my biggest celebration is that, I have students of mine that I, have been in touch with for 20, 25 years who still call me, still message me, have invited me to like their weddings or whatever it might be. So they looked at me more than just a tennis coach. They looked at me as the human being first, and then a coach second. And that's kind of like, for me, it's like when I work with a player, I'm looking at how can I make them as a better person first, and understand life skills, and then let's make them a better tennis player. So it's kind of a total, like kind of synchronized thing there. So I really feel like if we do that as a coach, we approach it that way, it's a total win for them. They're not going to lose out no matter what the outcome is long term. They're going to be much better off than what they were if I just solely was like, oh, we're only working on forehand, whatever it may be,
Totally.
So I think in my process, like going through that change, then it was like, then as I got into, my later years of high school, I played only half of my freshman year of high school tennis. The school I went to, there was a guy before me who was really, really good, went really far in state, he went and played at Northern Illinois for tennis, was a nice player, but when I came out as a freshman is the year he graduated. So the coach used to say we wished either he was a year younger or I was a year older, because we would have played in doubles, because doubles actually was my thing in juniors. So in my area, I was always in the top like 1-2 ranking in doubles in my division, especially in 18s. Yeah. And that was kind of when things for me kind of came together in 18s. And that's where the coach I had at the time was almost having me want to go play at Michigan State, was actually a potential place I was going to maybe go and play for, and some other schools. But at the time, it was one of those things where I was a perfectionist on the tennis court, also a perfectionist in this classroom. And maturity-wise, for me, I had trouble juggling them both. And for me to be under scholarship back then, just like most now, you have to hold a certain GPA or a certain grade average stuff. And my fear in the back end was I would focus so much on school that my tennis would suffer. And my passion is in tennis, as much as education is important, but that was not my main purpose. I obviously get good grades, but it was just one of those things, my passion, my drive was the tennis. So I was like, and then if I focus so much on tennis, and if my grades drop at school, then I might lose my scholarship. So I ended up foregoing college, saying that if I don't, my dream was to play professional tennis. So I was like, all right, if I don't make it in that, and if I don't want to be in tennis anymore, or do something in tennis that maybe requires more education, then I can always later on go back to college and just solely focus on the academic side. So that was my mindset.
Gotcha.
And that was me having to sit down with my parents and saying, hey, I'm not going to be like my one brother. One of my brothers who went to college, I'm like, I'm not going to go to college, and this is why. And they were really actually supportive of it, because they just said, I talked very logic, because they knew how I was, that I go.
You had a plan. You weren't just like, all right, fuck it, I'm not going to college. You were boom.
I just told them, I said, I'm never not willing not to go, but I want to give this a shot, because I only have one life. And it's like, if I don't do this now, I don't want to. My grandmother on my mom's side used to always say, don't live life saying, shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Totally. So, regret's the worst.
Right. So I was like, I know what, I'm going to go and do this. And if I do it and it works out great. I'm pursuing my dream. I'm living my dream. But if it doesn't, then I know I could always go back to school and I could educate myself. I want to do something out of tennis, but I know deep down that I wanted to stay in the game no matter whatever chips were laying on my cards. I just knew it. And that's kind of goes back to one of my first coaches. She saw in me that I just love to help other kids. And in the case now, helping young adults and kids as well, and even coaches as well. Now it's a lot of what I do now as well. And and like I said, and then going out of high school, I taught full time, and then during that time, I started playing futures. Back in 2002 is when I started playing. My first future was actually in Decatur, Illinois, and I was scared. I had no idea whether I was going to get in or not. Was I good enough? It was a really like a really kind of like an understanding. It was a really great education for me, because that first one I ever went to, I actually ran into a couple of kids I played juniors with that I hadn't seen in years. Yeah. That were in college, and they were playing in that. So I had people that I kind of felt a little bit comfortable. Now I knew some people, but also it made me come out of my comfort zone too and meet a lot of people that I didn't know, and they were from different countries or different states, and and also we're all there, trying to pursue the same outcome, trying to make a living at the game. And so I played 2002 to 2008 playing futures. I only played 2 challengers in my time, and pretty much all quality stuff. But yeah, during the whole time I was teaching still full time. Wow. I was taking sometimes half of the summer off. So it was kind of like play 3-4 events, go work for a while, go back, play 3 more events and that. But part of my thing through my other story is because one, how I played, and also the game was getting faster, more physical. Right. And for me, I had a tendency to overtrain, not listening to my body. Looking back, I think I don't have any regrets on how hard I worked, but I think that knowing the knowledge I know now, I think how I structured my tournament schedule, how I structured not my nutrition. It was really, really good with the person I worked with, but my recovery time and stuff, I think would have helped me more have better opportunities to have better results, because my results never reflected on my ability.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's like I would do exhibitions with Luke and Murphy Jensen and that, and like, Luke was a big supporter of mine. He really tried to, even actually have me come down to Florida and try to like actually live and train out of Saddlebrook at one point.
Nice.
And so he was a real supporter of me and believed in like me, that I could do something. And I had many other ones as well in the game, much better players than myself, who supported me and saw that I had potential. But it just, every time I started to kind of get my wheels going, I had some pretty significant injuries. But those injuries, at the time when you kind of live in the moment, in life, you sometimes think, well, why is this happening? Like, I'm working so hard, I'm doing all these things. And you would see players, when I was playing, that were, up drinking, partying, doing all this stuff, and they were like getting the results that you're trying to get, but it was coming, I don't want to say easy, because you still got to work hard, but it was just what you're taught as a kid, like,
they're getting those results despite the bad habits, right?
Correct.
Imagine how good they would be if they did everything right.
Absolutely right. Yeah, totally spot on. And so that was hard for me to swallow at one point. Early in my circuit career, I was like, man, this is crazy. For 2 years, I was like, how is this happening that I'm working so hard, I'm doing all these things, and then I wasn't getting these results? But I am a firm believer, certain things happen in life for a reason. And all these injuries, and I had some pretty severe injuries when I was playing. Like, I avoided like 8 surgeries as a player. Because I had a great, amazing doctor. Actually, he's in Florida now. His name's Dr. Ross Hauser. He's what's called a prolotherapist. He's a specialist. He's like one of the top in the world for it. He's if it wasn't for him, I would have probably been coaching just full time a lot sooner. I think my dream would have been like really cut if it wasn't for him, because everyone else would have wanted to open me up and do surgeries and stuff.
Totally.
And
you've been out of commission for a while.
Yeah, and so he was a huge help for me. And but it was funny, like spiraling then into like eventually when I was about 28 years old is when I made the decision finally. At that point, I sat down with myself again, and it was like, at the time I was married. My wife and I were living in a townhome, and we're trying to go in that next step in our life. Eventually want to have a child, which I was 31 when I had my son landed. And before that happened, though, it was really that my wife's like, I want you to stop when you're ready. And I said, I would keep going as long as I can, but I think my body's telling me a different story, and I'm thinking of my quality of my life and how I want to be a good husband and I want to be a good dad when I become a dad at the time.
Right.
And I said, I have so many kids who I have now that are counting on me and really believe in me as a coach and really are grateful to work with me as much as I'm grateful to work with them. So I took that leap, to just fully go on coaching. I still play like prize money events and like nationals, but I never played any more pro tennis after that in July of 2008. And it was hard at the very beginning because I kept calling myself a player and then a coach, and then eventually now it's like I'm just a coach. And but it was that hard. I took about a year and a half to kind of finally accept that, like, the rackets are really not going to come back up to try to compete at that level anymore.
Right.
And but it from all those injuries that I was saying earlier and that I went through, it really helped me help a lot of players, because I had a boy who played at Deerfield High School. Was the one that stands out right away was, he fractured his back. He was going through some real tough stuff. Not to really out this guy's stuff, but we were going through a lot of hard times. And when he fractured his back, he went in a really bad mental state. And, for a lot of the coaches, they didn't understand sometimes his reactions or his behavior. And he was a good kid, but to understand someone at a deeper level, understand what they might be thinking or
what
feeling,
they're going through,
and I think, as I think that's part of it. Is I think everyone in life, no matter what you do in life, is that part of the connection is when you connect with other people that have a similar story or feeling of what's gone through. Whether it's someone having cancer or whatever. When you have someone that lives that or something similar, they can relate of what you might emotionally or mentally felt at the moment, or what you're experiencing. And for him, and for him, I was the one that kind of helped get him out of that.
Right.
And it was like a year and a half of hard work by him, but I was there by his side to get him out of that. He was one, and I had another student of mine, that also really bad injuries, but also in a different way had some really troublesome times, because he had another one was like, I had an example real quick, was I had a student who was a single mom working like crazy hours trying to support this boy. I was not his full coach at the time. It was actually another coach.
Yeah.
And he's from Russia, and the other coach was from the country Georgia, and used to fight all the time over all different stuff. Some stuff I didn't understand what they were saying, but they would always fight all the time. And he used to be in my program at the one facility I was at, and he used to constantly be kicked out of my class for like breaking rackets, bad language, what do you want? Just not ideal stuff. And I could see, and again, I was not his coach, but I could see there was a lot of stuff going on, upstairs. And it turned into, eventually one summer he came up to me and he's like, would you coach me? Because he stopped coaching the other coach. And I just told him, I said, bottom line is this. I'm like, when you're acting the way you are, you're disrespecting your mom who's working so hard. You don't have a dad around to support you. Your mom's doing everything on her own. I'm like, she's doing all this stuff. Then you're doing this stuff to your equipment. I'm like, you're destroying the equipment that your mom worked so hard to help you with, to provide you with. I said, and then you're disrespecting yourself. And I told myself, I'm going to go forward and coach you. You're going to respect your equipment. You're not going to, if you behave one time bad, we're done. I basically had that hard talk with him.
Right,
just
that
saying,
ultimatum.
Hey, ultimatum, like, hey, if I'm going to do this, you're representing your mom, you're representing yourself, and if I take you on, you're representing me. That whatever behavior you have, I'm okay with, and the behavior you've been doing, I'm not okay with. And he's one of those kids he played Division I tennis, but was he one of my best players that I ever developed from the ground up? In this case, I got him later on. No. But the connection I had with him was very deep. He looked at me like a big brother, a dad, and still to this day, like now, he's like a male nurse, and he's also like a famous producer for house music. So he goes around the world, like goes to all over Europe, making music with other musicians and stuff. So it's really cool to see him that way, because I'm just thinking of like, as you can reflect on, like, as work with anyone you work with, you think about where you got them when you started and like where they went, and not just the tennis development, but the personal development. You can see that stuff. It's really cool to see that take place, and just to be part of that. I've always had that mindset that like, I had a parent one time like, my kid's not that good. Why would you work with him? I'm like, I'm not personally a coach just only working with the best players or want to work with the best players. I don't mind working with, as long as there's someone. I told his dad one time, I work with kids that are 5 years old, 17 years old, and 80 years old. I'm like, to me, it's just as long as they love the game and I'm passionate about it, how can I help them with the time I have? And I'm grateful they want to work with me, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'm not going to go through the motions, and that's part of what I built my name in this area where I live, is they know that, I conduct myself in a professional way. I have high standards of myself. I have high standards of my players, but they know that first and foremost, I care about them as a person first, and then the players always second. And I think the parents understand that, like, I'm trying to also be supportive of them, but also a good role model for their kids, when I'm out there. So
interesting you say that, man, because I know, at least like in my journey so far with all the players I've supported, it's probably similar in your perspective too. A lot of times what athletes need, like that one scenario you mentioned, is they need someone to hold that higher standard for them that maybe no one in their life has set for them, right? So it's not really their fault, especially when we're talking about kids, or when we're talking about young men, young ladies, teenagers, all that. Mm-hmm. Especially now, if you take it even to the modern world now, with everything going on in society, it's like, it's even more important. And I want to go even deeper on that side, but it's even more important for us as coaches to be the ones who got to set that high standard for them, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think that's something that I'm curious to know, like your thoughts on kind of how coaching in that landscape was, 15, 20 years ago compared to now, and kind of like some of those differences, right? So I think my question would be, training, you trained mainly like the 90s, 2000s, right? Yeah.
So from 94 to now. I've been on the court. Yeah.
So what would you say are like the main things from the coaching side, right? Being on the player perspective, like earlier on, but also being aware of what your coaches were doing. And then kind of like now in the landscape that you're seeing today, what would you say are like the main kind of differences from like 90s, early 2000s to like now?
I think, from the player standpoint, I think that's changed is, I think, obviously the kids nowadays, and like I said, my son's going to be 13. I think they're growing up in the world of technology, to a point where like their attention span, their focus is different. So I know personally for me, I've changed some of my style over 30 years. And as you know, you keep evolving, keep learning. And I'm a person where, there's like directive and indirective coaching. And going back to like the 90s, more coaches were very directive. do as I say, don't question it, just do, whatever it is, high amount of volume, blood, sweat, and tears. You're putting everything
drill
out there.
sergeant.
Yes, very, very authoritative.
Right.
Most of the coaches I worked with were similar personality to kind of me, where they, even though like the gentleman who would change all this stuff, I trusted him because his approach was not authoritative. It was more like us having a conversation right now and saying, hey, this is what I feel is best for you. And I had all the ability to say, no, I don't want to do that.
It was a two-way street, as opposed to just, okay, I'm the sergeant, you got to do this, boom.
Yeah, and that's, and like I said, back in the 90s, there were coaches like that, like what we're talking about in the aspect of being open, but there was more at the time, I felt, at least in my experience, more like very, very diligent about attention to detail, which was great, but almost over compulsive of every little technical thing that, as you know, it's more than just that little thing here and there. It's also like understanding what is the player good at, what are they not good at, like are they understanding it, So I think, like me personally, I think what I've changed over my years, a style I've done, and it was something I had this discussion with Emma Doyle a couple of years back, because it was something I was already doing, but I think I've even gone even more in that direction over the past, 7-8 years, is if I'm coaching you, when I see something going on, instead of me immediately wanting to fix it, and I know I could fix it, but I want the player to kind of almost self-fix. Right. So I would have it going, hey.
So you're guiding them almost to their own fix. So they're accountable for their corrections, right? It's not just you doing it. You're kind of teaching them to fish as opposed to just handing them the fish.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, like one of her things was the power of the question.
Yeah.
So I think that was, she used to say the power of the question or the power of the pause. So when I teach kids, especially nowadays, for myself personally, if I said, Chase, this particular thing, you're playing out a point, and say, hey, if you had a chance to hit that forehand again, if you could do it again, what would be an option that you might have chose differently? And then it gives you a moment, and it would give a moment for them to really digest it, think about it, and most of the time, they always actually give the right answer. And then when a similar scenario, because as you know, no one point's the same, but when they get a similar scenario, they make better on it. And they execute, and then you can see, because they basically answered their own issue, they empowered themselves.
Fundamentally, you're teaching them how to think instead of what to think, right?
Correct.
And I think if you even zoom out bigger, just looking at forget about just tennis education, I think just education in general, my personal opinion on it is in schools and stuff, they're more now teaching people what to think. And I think that's kind of being lost. And I like everything you're saying, because as coaches, as role models, as just educators in general for the next generation, it's we got to teach them how to think so they can be self-sufficient, so they're not dependent on us, right? I'm sure the best, results in coaching experiences you had with your players are those ones where you make these fundamental changes in them, and now you're seeing all this awesome stuff they're doing now later in life. And it's because I taught them these values, these lessons, these standards that are not only relevant for tennis, but in any aspect,
No, that on the head as far as also outside of even tennis, because my son, he has special educational needs. And, we had to, from my son, from the time he was 2 years old, my wife was the first one to notice that something wasn't right. So in a shorter version of the story, went through all this testing. We went everywhere. We live here now in Elmhurst, where I'm at now, because I was living in this place called Darien, which is not too far from here, and we were in that school system, and nothing worked. Regular school systems up didn't work, and then we moved to another area, and that school system wasn't working for him because everything was very directive, and he had dyslexia and dyscalculia and a bunch of other stuff, and no one knew how to teach him. But now he's at a school that's world renowned for what they do, and a lot of this is what we're talking about, is giving them the tools to understand themselves and how to be proficient in what they need to learn, but also when they step out of the classroom into the real world, they have tools on how to survive, basically. And I think that's a thing. Even for now, I've been doing even some educational stuff with parents, and I told them, as a parent myself, I'm it's very easy to want to do something for your kid. I said, but only when you're making feel good is yourself. You're not helping the kid. There was a parent, I don't work with them, there was a parent asking me questions, this was a couple months ago, and they were doing the water, the bat, doing all this stuff like that. And it's an older kid, 16-year-old kid, and I said, they didn't even know how to grip their own racket. And I said, and I told the individual, because he asked me opinion as a boy, and I said, bottom line is this. I said, the more you keep doing stuff, the less he's learning how to survive, not just here on the tennis court, but in life.
Creating dependency.
Right. I said, because he's 16 years old. I'm like, I have kids that are literally 7 years old, know how to regrip their racket. I said, I make sure that they understand the basic skills and necessities that we need to be doing on the court that we're required for. Showing up early and doing a warm-up. You're required to, and I told him, I said, here's an example. I said, it was something that was great, was by Tony Nadal, talking about the first experience Nadal had of basically being relying on, like, taking care of himself, is one tournament he went to, and you might have heard this story, went to a tournament and he forgot his water. And his uncle Tony said, you got to play without water. That's your fault. So he goes, and I said, and I told the dad, the thing is, I go, do you think Nadal ever forgot water again?
Hell no.
And I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, the same thing with my son. My son, it's super cold out here in Chicago. It's like it's 10 degrees out. I'm like, hey, don't forget, he's got a sweater on. Don't forget your jacket. I'm not gonna lie. There's been a few times where he forgot his jacket. So I'm like, I guess you ain't going outside for PE, for like their break time outside, because it's gonna be too cold. Or if he's out there, he's gonna be cold, but he's gonna learn. It's not that I'm trying to be mean as a parent, but it's like, if he doesn't understand that he's old enough that, it's different if he's an infant.
Right.
And he can't take care of himself, but now he can tie his shoes, walk, make decisions for himself. But I want to help kind of give him those tools, so when he's an adult and he's not in my house anymore, he knows how to be self-sufficient, and then hence going back to like our tennis conversation as well.
Totally, man, 100%. No, that's so interesting, and you definitely have a unique perspective on that with the whole journey of your son. Super interesting to hear about. I'm curious, man, like when it comes to players taking like full ownership and true like full accountability over their game, how do you usually build that for an athlete when you're working with them, right? So that they're not, having mommy and daddy bring their cooler, bring their water, all of that. What type of kind of first few steps can like coaches around the world kind of take to start building those qualities in their athletes?
Well, I think one of the big important things is making sure that you first off understand what the player wants to do with tennis, what the parents' expectations are, because I think, as you know, I think the important thing is having not only a good relationship with the player, but a good communication and relationship with the parents, because you might have a great with the kids, but if the parent doesn't think you're doing right, or they might want to take over whatever, and again, protecting the kid but not helping the kid. So my best, I guess, advice to any coach is that the biggest thing is to have a sit-down conversation and be very clear. I don't care if it's a 7-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid, like understand like where they're at their game right now, where are they physically, mentally and emotionally in their life, whatever that is. Understand what the parents' expectations are. I think the other thing too, I had this conversation the other day on another podcast actually, was the importance of educating parents. I think what happens is that, the kids are really serious and then maybe the pro's exceptional on the court, but then like the other things are like simple as like sign up for a tournament. What tournament should I play? What tournaments should I not be playing? And then sometimes what will happen is if we as coaches don't educate the parent outside of that, then they go, okay, well the coach is great here, but all these other things they're not good at, or they don't care enough to do it. Yeah. So then they're dropping the ball, and then they have parents spending more money than they need to go to tournaments that maybe the kid's not good enough to do. And it was like one time I was not a personal student of mine, but I was helping another coach, and I remember Mobile, Alabama for a tournament, and the girl, I remember her as a kid in that, and I remember I had a good conversation and relationship with the parents because they knew me before this, and I took their daughter to the tournament, and I watched her, and she just got really beat bad every match. It was I was like a level 2 at the time. She's level was just not there yet, and for her it was all about just telling everyone what level she played at. And I remember sitting down with the mom, before, and I told her coach too. I'm like, she's chasing the level. Right. Like just to say, oh, I played a level 2, whatever. I said it should be I'm chasing on every day improving aspects of whatever I need, social, emotional, physical, tactical, whatever, improving those skills. So I think as a coach, like it wasn't even my own student, but I was trying to help the other coach. I was just simply sitting down and going, hey, like there has to be some type of some kids you could say, oh, you need to make goals. I'm not against goals by any means, because as you know, you might make a goal and then 2 weeks later, the kid's already done the goal. Right. I think it has to keep moving the goalposts depending upon what they're getting and understanding, and then also having the understanding to convey it to the player, but also the parent, what the player is understanding and what they're not understanding, which kind of goes back to the asking questions part. Right. So if I ask you a question, you're like, I don't, or I can see you don't understand, then it means I have to figure out another way to help explain it better, or create a better question out of it,
right,
to create your more thought process, and then from that also be able to be more informative to the parent. And I think the importance of the player, coach, and parent relationship is key, because I know in my time I have had certain difficult parents, that are, I had a parent probably about a year ago came to me. The girl was like 9 years old, and the mom and dad are showing me videos of this girl who was playing at the Piatti Academy, which is a very well established. They have a great coach and they have great players there. And he's like, look at this 9-10-year-old. Look how she's hitting and moving and stuff like that. And I told the parents, I said, okay, let's be completely clear. I'm like, this girl is playing probably 8 hours a day. Your daughter is a good athlete, has a lot of potential, but she's only playing 4 hours a week.
Right.
So I said, for 4 hours a week, she's amazing.
Right. They want the result of that other person, but they're not doing the action items. So you got to be realistic with the results you want based on how much work you can actually put in, right?
Right. I told him, I said, if you want to compare someone who's playing 4 or 5 hours a week, I'm not a big component of comparison. I said, if you compare it and it motivates you, I'm all for it. I said, but for most kids, I go, when you start comparing, I said, especially with these younger kids, I go, if I go on social media, I go on Instagram, for example, and I show, well, why aren't you more like this person? I go, really what you're doing, you're not motivating your kid, you're breaking them down. And
it's impossible to win that game. There's always going to be someone faster than you with a bigger forehand, with a bigger serve.
Yeah.
It's a completely different journey. They've been dealt different cards by whatever the Lord or whatever you believe.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, it's got to be internal, right? It's great to have goals. I mean, especially with this generation, they're so crazy about like, I want to increase my UTR and all this stuff. Look, like we can even talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in being accountable as coaches to actually help players.
Yep.
But it's not about getting you 1 UTR improvement, 2 UTR improvement. It's about the person you're going to become from the person who deserves that and is actually now able to attain that.
Yep.
So it's great to have kind of some of those, maybe a little bit more surface level goals.
Yep.
But then it can't only be that, right? That when the going gets tough, if you only care about your UTR, it's going to be tough for you to put in the work, continue doing your jump rope, continue doing all your action items when no one's looking, when you hit a roadblock, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is the UTR is a great example. I think it's, when I was a college coach, and when I was coaching, it was right when there was tennis recruiting. So before when I came out of college coaching, it was right when UTR just started. And I told him, I said, the gentleman, I mean, unfortunately, the gentleman passed away last year who formed UTR.
Totally, yeah.
But
rest in peace.
Yeah, but the thing I said, the main goal he created that for wasn't for, I said, players or parents to obsess about it. It was solely to help college coaches, whether recruiting in state or out of the country, understand, hey, if you're an 8 UTR, you're pretty much a similar level at ATR here.
Totally.
So I'm like, so if they're recruiting abroad or here, they have a better understanding of what the ecosystem's like.
Right.
I said, but like nowadays, so many kids are obsessed about UTR or WTN, which mainly kids still WTN for so many is still too new.
Right.
But UTR is still an obsession.
Totally.
And I told them, I'm like, if you want to use it as a guideline,
sure.
Okay, I'll meet you there.
Just one component.
Right.
Just one component.
Right. But I'm like, but if you're obsessed
it's
about
an indicator.
Right. Because there's many times, like I had a parent 2 weeks ago, I had a boy in my like won 2 tournaments in a row. And he's like, oh, his UTR went up here. And then this one kid he had was like, a point whatever UTR, and he beat him. So he's going to go up this. I'm like, and then he goes, isn't that great? I'm like, I'm happy that, because I go, every time in all my years of teaching tennis, even before I changed some of my methodologies, if you play a tournament, I saw you, I never said, did you win? I asked, how did you play? The things that you wanted to accomplish, were you able to do that?
Right.
I go, I'm
focusing on the inputs.
Right.
Did you go out and actually do the inputs that we talked about?
Right.
And we set in the game plan. Win or lose, that's not really within your control. UTR, it's not within your control.
Right.
But, okay, we were talking about this routine. Yep. Did you do the routine? We talked about having a massive split step. Well, did you do that? You're in control of that. Did you do that? Right. And then you can kind of judge from there based on their inputs, which is you can accurately judge what they're doing versus if they're playing Carlos Alcaraz, you might not win, right? But if you played the best that you've played, then that's the real win right there.
Well, like I tell some of the kids sometimes too, I go, some of my personal best matches were actually matches I lost. they were not matches I won.
100%.
I'm like, there's some matches where I'm like, man, I couldn't play it any better. And in the key points of the match, they played better. And I had no problem going to shake their hand and know that, hey, you know what, I can hold my head up high. Like I competed, I pushed them, I played lights out for me. And then just in those key moments, they played a little bit better than me.
Right.
And it's okay that, like, I'm more accepting that. I said to him, I go, what you have to look at is, like, I told him, I was like, you know, I'm big into also like analytical stuff. And I said, you have to understand, I go, like, you know, I go, there's matches, especially like some of the formats we have here, where they played, you know, fast 4 or whatever. So I'm like, sometimes you might, I go, I tallied how many points if you and I played, maybe we played like 30 points, and maybe you beat me, but you might have only won like 3 more points than me. But on the score line, it looks like you killed me. But it was closer than what it was.
Totally.
You know, I said, the perception, you know, from a scoreline always isn't truth telling, you know? I said, but if you come out there and say, hey, you know, like, there's been times where students of mine, I literally have them have like a notebook, and I have like write down stuff, or I'll either write stuff that I want them to focus on, or they'll write themselves, depending upon if I'm in person or not.
Right.
And I'll say, okay, what's your goals for the tournament? And they'll write down whatever it may be, you know, and a lot of them I always focus, because some it's like, I always tell them, like, you can control your attitude, you control your effort. I go, so those are obviously on the premium block. And like you said a minute ago, I'm like, you just remember, you never can control the outcome. You can only control point by point what you can do in those points to think through what you could be doing better, whether you're winning the point or not. I said, sometimes you play a very challenging point that you lost, but you didn't work for it. They might be so frustrated from that, even though they won it, that they might give you the next 2 points. But if you don't dive in and like figure out what you're trying to do, and you're just hitting like mindless hitting, then all of a sudden they win like 3 points in a row, you win a point and they win a game, and you know, next game just goes on. It just becomes a really fast match, you know.
Totally.
And there's no purpose behind it. So but yeah, no, the UTR stuff, like I said, I'm not against it. I think if it's in its right context and what it should be used for, I think it's good.
Totally.
You know, any of the things, you know, even like even rankings, you know, when I was growing up, there was no UTR, it was just your rankings, you know. And I think that, like, for myself, even as a junior, you know, or even when I was playing the circuit, you know, because there was a circuit ranking too. So when I was growing up, there's a thing called ITF had a thing called top 500 list. Okay. So like when I first started off on it, you know, to get even a top 500 in the US was good. So I started at 495. Then from 495, I went to like, I think it was like 3 something. And then when I finished up in 08, I was at 220. So I was right at the cusp of guys who were like having pretty good points, like getting points and having good points. Because I'm in the computer, but I never got any points. Was basically anyone that was about 200 or higher at least had like 3 or 4 points or above, whatever, singles, doubles, etc. Right. And so for me, it was like my main focus was like, how can I improve my skills? And by improving my skills or whatever it is I need to improve on, the ranking will take care of itself. You know, so that was something that I think that was like validating. And I think that's the thing I keep stressing with the newer generation, is understanding that be process driven, not result driven, because if the process is done right, and if it's, whether it's me as the coach or me working with the parents to create a better environment so that they perform better, that's what we want to create. Because if, like you were saying earlier, if you empower the player and that to get better at whatever it is, it transfers over to life, but also transfers in their long-term development.
Totally.
You know, if you have someone at 9 years old and you're keeping something basic, but then like you see they can do so much more, you kind of keep pushing the envelope, maybe sometimes not always telling them, but creating an environment so it's pushing them. And the next thing you know, they can look back like 3 months ago and go, wow, I couldn't even do that 3 months ago. Whether it's a certain way they're playing, a certain way they're hitting, you know, as you know, whatever it might be that the focus is on. Totally. So, but yeah, like I said, I think that as far as when you're going back to the original question about things have changed, I think that we are more, the generation now is so more focused on, you know, less attention span to some extent. So it's important of like, when we do have their attention, you're giving like the golden nuggets of like good information to kind of digest and try to self-figure out. And I think, you know, I think that things are going in a direction where when I was growing up, it was so drill saturated. Everything was constantly drilling, ball machine, you know, everything's. The only thing I think that has changed in at least where I've grown up, nobody really tossed balls. Everything was fed or hit, you know. So now, as you know, I know like the Spanish Federation, you know, they were really big in a lot of hand tossing and stuff like that. Do I do it too? Yes, you know, I do. But that's something I think has evolved in my experience over the years. That's become more prevalent of like working on certain, maybe, you know, certain footwork patterns early on doing certain tossing, certain types of things, the correct things and stuff like that. But I also think there's all other flip side where I think coaches are also starting to catch on that you can also still make those improvements by just creating certain scenarios or environments that, again, creates them to be creative thinkers out there to figure out solutions.
So are you saying there's a little bit more of a shift in training towards, instead of more hand feeding stuff, to more like live ball? Is that what you're saying?
I think that it's starting to go that way. I think like if you would ask me 5 years ago, when I go to most of my clubs around, there's a lot of coaches doing a lot of hand feeding, which I'm not 100%.
Are we talking high performance generally?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where I feel that it is good, but I also feel that there's also, depending upon the level of high performance we're talking about,
right,
it can also be counterproductive, because as you know, if I'm just dropping a ball in your sweet spot all the time to work on something, get a feeling of something, that's fine. But if that's all you're training, you're not training the adaptability, the problem solving, because as you know, in a match, you might have hit like 100 different forehands.
Right.
But you're only working on one forehand.
Exactly.
And if a ball lands there, that forehand may look great. But if the forehand's above,
you're never getting a ball like that when it's actually being hit live.
Right. So for me, that's partially why my body falls apart, because I actually do a lot of hitting in my lessons. As most of my coworkers call me like the Energizer Bunny or machine, because they don't even know how at my age I'm still hitting at the level I do all day long. But I just know that way works, where I can always slow things down. But I guess my way I also look at it, for me and my coaching styles, I read the player, like how are they doing that day, like what's their energy. Like I had a lesson last Monday night, normally a lot of energy, super focused, and he was a little off, and the dad said he had a tournament all weekend. He lost in the semis, but you could just tell he was out of it. So I knew in that situation, the things that we normally be working on, I can't hold it at that same standard for the whole time.
Totally.
Because he's just going to go out. He's going to give out, and he's like a 11-year-old kid. So I had to find other things that we need to work on and address it in a more, like, we'll say, still high level, but we'll just say I lowered the bar a bit, just so that I told him, I said, I know you can't give me 100% today. I know what your 100% looks like, but if you give me 80, let's make 80 the whole way.
Let's get 100 of that 80.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Whatever you got, let's get
that. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that was my thing with that individual. But I think, like I said, I think the thing also too is that looking back to the 90s, I had a coach, when my coach left to San Diego, I had a coach when I was trying different coaches before I found the one who, eventually developed me on through the rest of my career.
Yeah.
There was a coach, I won't say his name, but there was a coach that basically, he's not in tennis anymore.
Clip it. No, I was kidding.
Yeah. Where I did a lesson with him, and everyone's like, oh, this guy's working on all the best players. And so my mom had sought him out, and I got a lesson with him. And I was at DuPage Community College, doing a lesson with this guy. And first lesson, he comes up to me. I don't even know more than like 5 minutes. I've warmed up already. He shows up.
Yeah.
And he's like, I want 50 balls in a row down the middle. You can't miss. So I was not the greatest grinder at this point, to hit that many balls. And I was missing every within 20 balls, 30 balls, etc. And I could just see this is massive big guy. He was getting more frustrated. So finally he comes up to me, says some explicits to me in that, and just says, we got some problems. So of course he's like, you got 3 opportunities. Well, I didn't do it. So he calls me to the net. He grabs me by my shirt, lifts me off the ground.
No.
I'm this far off there.
No.
And this is the back in the days of collared shirts and cotton.
Oh my gosh.
So he's ripping my shirt while he's holding it there. And my mom is like, what are you doing? And my mom was a very nice player, and she's like, she's like, my son is so hard on himself. She goes, he's one of these kids where she's like, if you just tell him what he needs to do better, he's gonna work his butt off to do it. You don't have to try to do that.
Right, they're trying to treat everyone the same way.
Right, and I think it's very good that you just said what you said, because that's the thing I think that I go back and forth with, thinking back of what happened in the 90s and now. I think that sometimes coaches got caught in, and still coaches now too, I think they cookie cutter everybody. Where for me, I can at least say, me personally, if you watch me teach even 8 hours, 8 hours or 10 hours, whatever I work, not one lesson looks the same.
Totally.
And it's something I've pride myself on, is to understand that if you look at me, I might work on some similar things that they each need, but I work on it according to what they're telling me or what I'm seeing that they're understanding or not understanding.
Totally.
So I think that's something that it still continues to go on now, that used to go on then, is still
too much cookie cutter.
Yeah, because I've had people, when I've had dialogues with coaches from many places, not just here, but when I've gone to different symposiums, and you have a lot of coaches that are very good coaches, but they will also say, well, this is how I've always done it, and this is how I produce my players. And there's a gentleman from the UK that I follow, like on LinkedIn. I have great conversation with him, and that Steve is his name, about how that's great that works, but if you only teach in one way and you work with 5 kids, you might only help 1 of the 5 kids. So what about the other 4 kids? Are we just taking their money? Are we wasting their time? We're actually wasting our time too, and the parents' time, and the commitment. So it's like, how can we create an environment that is they're teaching themselves? We're creating an a la carte to their needs.
Right.
Because I feel that if you do that, the improvements happen faster. The kid is more empowered. The parents are happy with the time and money invested in their kids. And then as a coach, you feel much more rewarding, that there's a greater connection too.
I mean, look, man, like from my perspective, it comes down to the player side and the coaching side. And it's like, okay, if you take the cookie cutter approach, you're not going to get as good of results for your students, like you mentioned. And also, because of that, it's also not going to affect you that great as a coach and your bottom line and your business and your, just your business as a coach, right? So it's like a two-way street. And I think more coaches nowadays need to realize that custom is the answer. Mm-hmm. Make it custom for your students, not only for your own business, and it will help you obviously, but more importantly, it's going to be specific for the athlete, so they're going to get to their North Star quicker. They're going to get on that pathway.
Absolutely.
That's the pathway to help you in your goals, whatever your own goals are with whatever you want to accomplish with your coaching business. I mean, that's the path. People will pay for custom, and they will pay a lot, but you actually have to be doing that, and you got to be willing to always be learning and have that mindset, because just because you've gotten good results for some players and you've worked with some top level players, you still have to always have that learning mindset. And I think it's easy for coaches, you train a few good players and it's like, shit, I know it all. You feel like you know it all. It's like, no, it's awesome you did this stuff, but there's always more to learn. The game's always evolving. And the minute you stop that, constant improvement and searching out and learning and being a student of the game, mm-hmm. that's when people will surpass you and all that. So especially if you're a competitor, most coaches, right, they were competitive people as players too. So it's like, that's kind of the fun of business, right? And the fun of coaching. It's like, I like to have that too as a coach and see, okay, well, how can I level up too, right? My own coaching, right? Yeah. And that's always learning, right? Having dialogues with other coaches, other people, because there's always something, no matter who someone is, there's always something you can learn from them. Even if they're telling you the wrong shit, you can know, okay, well, I know not to do that, right? So I think that's just something that's so critical, especially with newer coaches. Like, I even have a lot of young coaches coming to me, and it's like, I think that's the most important thing is always be learning, always be consuming something that's going to be helping either your mindset, keeping you feeling fresh, to make sure you're up to date with what can serve your athletes the best way possible, And
definitely with the growth mindset. I've had that since I was a kid, but that's just, I guess, how I was built in my brain, is always thinking that way, even from when I was basketball. Yeah. But what you were saying as far as also the younger coaches, I work with a lot of younger coaches myself, doing a lot of mentoring at my one facility, and some online stuff. And it's just, the one thing that I find is a lot of them just go to Instagram or social thing to get information, which is not entirely terrible, but if it's not correct information, then it's like you're absorbing not ideally great information and you're spitting that out. Totally. And then that might not be getting them the results. And
it's not specific information for them, right? That might be great information for the person that they're coaching, but it might not be exactly what their own coach, their own expert sees for them, right? Based on their individual capabilities, right?
Right. No, and I did a high school presentation and college presentation thing actually last month, and all these 400 coaches, and one of the things I talked about was actually part of the question thing. Yeah. But I told them, I said, our job is to understand in real time what that person needs. Right. And I go, you could see a drill on Facebook, YouTube, etc. I said, which are probably, a lot of them are actually maybe great drills. Sure. I said, but you have to understand the level of player you're working with. I said, because there's too many times where I get coaches I'm helping, and they're like, oh, I saw so-and-so, and it might be some world famous coach, and they're like, oh, I tried and it didn't work. I'm like, well,
who did they do that with?
Right, exactly. And I said, you have to understand, is this a drill that you can do a regression off of and make it easier for your player? Or is there a progressional step? Well, so if your player can do it, or they build up to it, what's the next step from that? It's understanding like what has to happen from that. And that's my biggest thing, is because I think there's so much, as you know, so much flooding of information out there now, more than ever before, that I think sometimes to certain points when I've talked to some coaches, I think it's almost like almost over flooding of information and not knowing what's right or wrong. And then it gets caught up into where like, well, so-and-so said this, and then as you know, we can go down the rabbit hole where then they're like, well, this person's a great coach with tactics, but they're trying to teach technical stuff, and they're not really that good at technique, but then that's what people buy onto.
Totally.
And then it ruins the player. It's just all those things you see and you hear, and it's like one of those things where like, I always tell the coaches, I'm like, I've been doing this for 30 years. Like looking back did everything that I do, maybe looking back now, was correct? No. But in the moment, I was doing the best I could with what I knew.
Totally.
And I did it with my heart, like I cared about the player and I was trying to do it. I said there's certain things I could step back and say, I could have probably did this well or did this, everyone can always improve.
Right.
I said, but never was it because I was just doing it for the money. I was doing it because I wanted to help the player or help that parent with their player or educate that parent. I'm like, as you know, as you get older, you learn through your mistakes or learn from other people's mistakes or successes on those things. Like you said earlier, like if someone's doing something incorrectly, I'm gonna make sure I don't do that, like you were saying. Or, hey, that worked. I remember when that situation, like I've been helping a couple coaches actually dealing with like parents right now, understanding like sometimes when the parents are demanding or, maybe not realistic to really where their kid's at and where they're gonna go. And sometimes, as you know, talent can be kind of used kind of loosely in our sport, because, talent thinks that it's just racket skills. It can be a lot of other things besides that, besides just racket skills, as you know. Yeah. So I think that, just because someone doesn't, as you know, there's some players, like I told a parent last week, actually, there are players even at the tour standard, and I mean, Andy Roddick said it best in his podcast about, they're amazing movers, but not the greatest hitters. I told the parent, like, most people use this example. I hate to use Medvedev as an example, but if you look at his strokes, would someone teach what he's doing? No, but his understanding of his court positioning, his contact point, what he wants to do with the ball, and his ability to move and do that and be physically
and
fit.
And his incredible timing.
Timing to do that. I'm like, that's the skill.
Totally.
I said that he's learned through trial and error how to perfect his skill.
Totally.
And it's making him be able to win a Grand Slam and be competitive in the top 10 like he is.
Totally.
I said there are other players. I said, and I told a parent, I go, there's players that, I said, when I was playing, I said, there was a guy, I said, from Australia who like hit massively big, 140 on his serves, massive ground strokes, but couldn't get out of the top 150. Because when things got difficult, his weakness was his mind. Exactly, his mind. Cracking rackets, flipping out. Right. I mean, he played the challenger that I played in, that's in Winnetka, and threw a racket up onto the indoor facility. So it's like, it's just one of those things where you look at, if you just to sit back, and I told the parent, like, if you could go to a tournament even, and you could see some players amazingly look great and can't win. They don't know how to compete.
Like if you just look at two people practicing, it's like, these dudes are the same level, but you put them in a match and it's 6-0. Yep. It's like, why is that?
Yep.
Up here.
Absolutely. No, totally 100%, man. It's like, it's amazing to have this conversation on a weekly basis, especially when you have new members and stuff, where they're like, well, my kid does this, my kid does that. I'm like, that's great. All good. And then they're like, well, they hit with so-and-so. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, but then they just hit. That's the other thing too, and I don't know how you feel. That's one other thing that I try to educate like kids and the parents is that if they go to practice for an hour, if they don't have a structured practice to work with each other, I'd rather have them just play sets.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, because sometimes, I don't know if you see this, but I see this a lot where they go and hit, and they just warm up down the middle, hit a few volleys, a couple cross courts, and then they consider that practice.
Oh, totally.
And I'm like, that's not realistic. You're not wanting to hit the ball down the middle to your opponent the whole entire match. You want to be able to move the ball. You want to change the speed, the spin, the height of the ball. Like all these things you're not working at. Like I'm just hitting you. Let's hit nice, or if we're feeling really good, we're just rip the ball really good. I'm like, I told purposely. I told myself, I have a buddy of mine that I travel with who's from Poland, and I had the biggest laugh. He hit with this guy from Boston University back when I was playing, and they literally like before our first round of qualifying, we were like ripping the cover off the ball. Neither one could miss the ball. Like literally like cross course down like, I mean, no exaggeration, like 30 minutes, not missing a ball, just hitting the ball like I think as hard as they could hit the ball. And they both go out and they lose right away, like 1-1. And then you're like, and one of them was like, I don't know how I could hit like that. And I'm like, and I used to tell him, like, I go, I don't hit nearly as well as you from the baseline. And I said, I watched your match. I said, but what you were doing wasn't smart, how you were playing. You were trying to hit through him. That's all that guy wanted to do. It was like a counter puncher. I'm like, you're giving him something to hurt you with. You didn't change anything.
Well, I think that's like the player, it's not a specific scenario. It's like, well, technically speaking, they're kind of unaware, and I think this is like the art of coaching as well, is identifying what is the actual bottleneck for the athlete, right?
Yep.
Like you said, those players were ripping, strokes look sick, probably hitting even great spots in their practice, whatever, but their issue is, well, do you even have a plan of when you're playing your points, like where you're going to hit the ball? Like, do you have an idea of like what your plan is, or are you just going to go out there and crush the ball, you know? So I think that's something that at least a lot of like parents and families who come to me for like online stuff, it's like their coaches in person aren't identifying some of those bottlenecks. And then it's like, if you can just give like if you can actually see some footage of their point play in tournaments. Yeah. And I would be curious to talk to you about that as well, of like judging players based on only what they're doing in practices versus tournaments, because my personal philosophy on this, and I think it's why online stuff is getting a lot bigger, is because there's kind of an epidemic of like coaches who kind of are only, and it's not the fault of the coaches, but just the model itself of they're only seeing their player in practices, which is not it's obviously great. It's better than nothing, obviously.
Right.
But if you're like a serious tournament player, my philosophy is your coach should have the ability to see you play, whether that's live, whether that's recording, so that you can kind of go back and watch points over, right? So like, what are your thoughts on that?
So here's my thing. So as I'm older, like I said, I have a family now. Yeah. Before I had my family, all my kids knew before my son was born, I would go to a ton of tournaments. I traveled like all around the U.S. going to tournaments.
Totally.
So that always, as you know, it was basically I call on-the-job learning, even as a coach, because you're seeing in real time kids that they've played before, maybe never played before, and how they respond to it.
Yeah.
So as I've gotten older, the two things I have personally used, and that is I've had where I use a thing called Racket Stats, and and that's an app that he came up with in that. It's like a free app, but I have a lot of times when I cannot see a player play, I'm like, hey, because a lot of times, as you know, sometimes the parents will get like very animated. I said, no emotion. All your job is to stat, first serve percent, all this stuff. I go, and then they would be able to send me like a PDF. So I can literally, and then before they had seen the next lesson, I have a good idea of what happened in the match.
Right, you have data.
Right.
Totally.
And I go, and then depending upon, because as you know, like, obviously, like I can't record another person's kid without permission.
Totally.
So like sometimes at tournaments they'll offer like tapes or CDs of like matches, and I always tell the parents like, oh, it's like $10 or $30. I'm like, it's the best $30 you can buy.
Oh, for
I'm like,
sure.
if you do it, I will sit in my laptop and watch it, and be able to see exactly what's going on, and then you have great talking points with the player. Whether it's in the lesson or on the phone or whatever else, because as you know, taking those extra steps may be all is needed to make that next breakthrough.
100%.
And so the other thing I like using in practice, I used to do it with one of my homeschool kids who now moved to Florida last year. He went from like a 4 UTR, example, we're talking about UTR, but it went from like a 4 UTR down to like an 8, up to an 8, like an 8, almost an 8.5 UTR in a year's time.
Holy shit.
And one of the things that we used was actually swing vision.
Yeah.
So I liked it because we could record when we were playing. I could have him play another match. I could have him play another set. Again, you play practice sets. Yeah. But it starts to become, as you know, it can show the speed, where the ball's landing. All the analytical stuff is just right there. And as you know, most of the kids are really tech savvy nowadays. So when I show them that stuff, for most of them, even if they don't like math, which I was not a big math person, but they like watching themselves play. It helps them even just watching, even if there's no analytics, if they just watch themselves play.
Totally.
So a lot of times, even like when I see, like for example, like when I see players play points out, sometimes I'll get my phone, I'll record, and I won't say anything. I said, just want you to watch yourself play. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that. Or, oh man, I over-recovered, or I didn't drop back enough. Or,
oftentimes they think they're doing something, but the video is awesome because you can actually have the real accountability.
Correct.
I think that's why I'm just a huge proponent of the video stuff. And one thing I wanted to mention for the audience here is, because what you mentioned about like the getting permission to record people, obviously, like that's a big thing, right? And I face that a lot when it comes to parents always ask that, like, oh, well, we can't record this. And usually like what I say is this, which is, you always, the best thing to do, like you go to record your match, you always ask for permission. And let's say you're playing a tournament, your athlete plays 2-3 matches. Odds are maybe one person might be like, okay, don't record or whatever. That's okay. You don't record that match. Yep. But if you're playing a tournament and you compete in, let's say, 3 matches, and let's say 2 people say no, but you still get 1, that's still exponentially better than if you just didn't even try, right?
Correct. Yeah,
so my advice to families out there is just like do your best to record it and just give yourself the opportunity. And look, if the tournament everyone says no, you can't record, so be it. At least you can sit back in the car when you're driving home saying, at least I tried, right? At least I took that action to give myself that chance. And there's going to be times where they don't want you to record, but when you can, it's just great information to provide to your coaches, so we can make accurate assessments to diagnose them and then program them for their next week or whatever it is.
Yeah, right? Whatever it is. Yeah, and I think something that was a big word that you said is the car ride home. I think it's from a parent standpoint, that is like one of the most crucial times. So it's like, if you have that data, like the video, I know from personal parents that I've worked with that some of them, they get so frustrated with their kid, and then the car ride is like the worst time to annihilate your kid because they can't go anywhere. So if they're already frustrated with themselves, and most of the time they're unhappy about the loss, the last thing I want to do is sit in a car for say 30 minutes to an hour, coming home and being berated about how could you be double faulting, this player wasn't as good as you, whatever. Those things actually are like cancer to your kid's game.
I think it's safe to say, I'm curious your thoughts. The player, I would say the player is not receptive to feedback usually. Maybe some players are, but usually, especially when they're really emotionally invested into their matches, they kind of maybe need a little bit of a cool down time and then collect their thoughts, give them some recovery, and then when they have a clear head, when they're thinking clearly, okay, let's have that conversation.
Yeah, no, to be honest with you, like for example, like for your audience and that, like, I would say it's with parents, but even when I was a college coach, there was times where my teams like played well and some, or maybe some of my players played well and some didn't. Like every player, knowing the player, knew it. There were some players I had on my team who wanted feedback right away.
Right.
And there was other ones that would say, hey, you know what, I want to talk to you at dinner.
Right.
That team dinner, when you're done, I want to talk to you.
So knowing the person, but that goes back to the custom thing, right? You're treating people as individuals. You're not just like, all right, guys, like, boom, you got to do it this way. Right. That's awesome.
Heck, I've even had some players that sometimes they don't want to talk until the next day.
Right.
Or like if we do like, when we used to do like quads, and they have like play 2-3 teams on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't want to talk about the matches until Monday.
Right.
And that's okay with me because I'm like, I want them to be most receptive that I can impact them with my time. I don't want to go to them and say, hey, what do you think is, and they go, I don't want to hear it. Or they get too emotional, you said emotionally involved, to where they're speaking from emotion than actually that like actually cognitive side, like digesting, like you said, what they did and then go forward. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
Totally, man. Yeah, man. I'm curious, like, from your journey, like getting into coaching and really taking that next step from just being, pursuing playing and then going to coaching, what do you think is the biggest mistake that like beginner coaches make that kind of maybe hurts their journey early on, that if they did implement something, it would just help them, expedite their career faster?
Well, I think one is being growth mindset, continue trying to learn, whether it's through our organizations that do coaching. I think speaking for myself, when I was a young coach, things were different then than now because just to make a difference of what coaches can do now compared to when I was doing it in the 90s. A lot of times when there was really good coaches, they had their like secret sauce and they didn't want to tell anybody about it.
Right.
And then like, or we'd have situations where like if you're coaching and you talk to someone else's player, you have coaches saying, hey, that's my player, don't talk to that player. Where that, I see less of that now going on, which is it's a good thing for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
But the one thing I think has been great with some younger coaches I've been helping before I took the position I'm in now was not being afraid to ask for help. I think that's the thing that I wish I had. I didn't have any mentors other than my coach growing up.
Totally.
I think if I was growing up in this generation, I think I would literally have been like literally a sponge. I mean, I was a sponge reading books and VHS tapes back in my generation. But I think now, if I was a young coach, say I'm 24 years old and I want to make this my career, not only would I want to get certified in different things, but I would literally say, hey, can I go to Piatti Academy and I will work for you for free for a month or 2 weeks or whatever it is to get the experience of what they're doing there, ask coaches questions. You know, like last year for me, I got to, you got to be with Dominic's team last year is a great example. And to be with Dominic and ask him questions, and I'll see, and asking his dad, and even his brother, who basically was his main traveling was his brother, Moritz. And it's like to ask them questions and understand, even the kids, because most of the kids in their academy are like basically almost in every age division, like one of the top players in the world in juniors and 12s and on up.
Yeah.
And to interact with their players, interact with their coaches of why they're doing stuff. And even though I'm an experienced coach and a lot of coaches have been coaching a lot less than I have, but I love to kind of get into their mind and ask their questions of kind of where they're at. And I think that, nowadays, I think as a younger coach, I think continually growing, but not be afraid to admit you don't know something. I think that if they don't know something, a lot of them feel a fault, like, okay, I don't want anyone to know. I gotta protect the ego.
Totally.
I gotta protect the ego that I know everything.
That's a big thing.
And I think that's the thing is like, like for me personally is like, my wife would laugh at me, but like I really just kind of like really humble and I just kind of go. I've always been like just kind of go with the flow, and my thing is like I'm never afraid of what anyone thinks of me. So if I come to you and say, hey, there's something, you're younger than I am, if there's something you're doing and I don't know how to do it, I'm not afraid to ask you and say, hey, that's something I've never done before. Can you show me how to do that?
Totally.
Like I'm open to that. I'm secure with myself and where I'm at as a person as much as a coach. And I think that's the thing for a lot of the younger coaches, not to be fearful to say, I don't know.
100%.
And I think that's the thing is when they come out there, especially the new coach, I have a coach I've been helping at an academy in Florida actually. When he got hired, he's like, oh, I got to do this and I got to do this and I got to do all this. I'm like, just be you. And if something you don't understand, you can ask me and I'm here to help you, or you can ask whoever your upper person is and hopefully feel that they're reciprocated to help you.
Totally.
And I think that's also the catch too, is because for myself, I've always wanted to help players, and I love helping coaches. The last 15 years, that's what I've been doing, is mentoring a lot of coaches. And I think that, sometimes it also comes down to, and in my experience, I don't know about you, but is also the club, the academy, whatever, their culture they have created there.
Totally.
Is a culture of support. Like at my one facility I work at, we support each other. I have many like PTR, PTA, Master Pros and stuff. They come to me and say, hey, what do you think of this? And they're like, hey, if I'm doing something you think I could be doing better, just tell me. Like we have an open relationship that way, that we like hold each other accountable in the aspect of helping each other. Whereas, I've worked at some places where, if there's something that someone's having an issue with, they'll come to me, but they'll say, you're the only one I feel comfortable. But there's other people that I know that could help them too, but they don't.
Because there's not the culture built in of learning, of growth, of openness with that information and stuff.
Right. So it's just one of those things where I think that if coaches, younger coaches, can get on the aspect of like learning from other coaches, going and experiencing things, even if it means you make no money, but you go for the experience of learning the knowledge, that's going to pay it forward to helping you become a better coach down the road, because maybe some of the information you learn, you may not be able to use it at that moment, but you don't know when it's going to go.
You don't know when that's the straw that breaks the camel's back in your journey,
Right. So yeah, I mean, that's something that I feel that, they definitely could be doing. I think if I was younger again, not that I'm so old, but when I was younger again in my early years, I think I would go to coaches, not just in the States, but overseas. I don't care if it's Canada, like I was in Austria there, Australia. Go there and just say, hey, I'm going to pay for my ticket. I'm going to go down there. I'll hit with your players. I'll help coach players, whatever. I mean, even when I was in Austria, like even Wolfgang, Dominic's dad, asked me to help out with some of their 14 to 16-year-old players that are top in the world in that. So I wasn't just there with Dominic, and also to interact with Dominic, ask him a lot of questions. I mean, it's just crazy to even hear, for example, like talking to him, and I'm asking him, like, who are the most difficult players that you've ever had to play, that was just challenging, from a physical or mental. And I thought for sure he'd say like Nadal or Novak, and he didn't. He said Federer and Sebastian Korda.
Wow.
Were his two most difficult people.
What was the justification there?
So he said the first time he ever played Roger Federer, he said he just felt like he was toying with him, like that no matter what he was doing, like Federer had an answer for it, you know. And he goes, he's like, yeah, I had beaten him before. He's like, but it took a long time for me to figure out, or playing just at the right moments, and waiting for him to not play well, because Federer played more, you know, attacking. Totally. And I told him, I said, what was so surprising was the Sebastian Korda thing. You know, because that's not a top 10 player.
Oh yeah.
You know, obviously an amazing player, but you know,
he's got a sick game though. Yeah. I saw him at IMG when I was coaching over there. Yeah. Sick game, crazy.
Okay. And it was crazy because I was like, okay, I got to know why. And then I go, he goes, in order for me to hit well, I need time. And he goes, Sebastian had a way of taking the ball so early and hitting it such a flatter ball at times. He goes, I felt like I didn't have time. He goes, I had to work on just staying in the point, where he was like, with other players, he goes, like a Nadal. He's like he said Nadal, he's like playing him at that, he goes, like French Open final. Yeah, he's like, he's tough. He goes, but I would love to play him first round at the French. He was like, early in the rounds, he goes, I feel good. I
guess he has time to think, right? As opposed to Korda, who's taking everything early, giving him no time.
Right.
Probably a lot harder to strategize there.
Right. So, and he just said, even like when he said with Federer, he said the first 2 times he played, he said the first time he played, I think he said in Auckland, and he just said, he goes, it was probably, he said, it was not like I was hitting that bad. He goes, but he was playing another level I've never seen before.
Yeah.
He goes, that every shot I had, no matter what I tried, it was like he had an answer, and he goes, it didn't look like he was trying. And he goes, every changeover, because I just felt so demoralized, you know. And but you know, it was like I said. But why I brought that up there with him is that, you know, going there, just seeing their methodology, the way their coaches are, the way they function is very much different than what we do here in the States. I'm not saying it's better or worse. Right. It's just that.
But as a coach, you want that information, so then you can make the assessment for your players. Okay, well, maybe this type of strategy will work, but at least now you have that info, right? You're not just going one way. You learn one thing, and now boom, you're only tied to that.
Right. Which goes back to what we were saying earlier in our conversation, where that if you have a toolbox, I always tell the kids if you have a toolbox.
I'm just gonna check on the timing of this. I just want to make sure we're still recording.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're good. We got about 20 minutes left.
Okay, no worries.
That's perfect time.
No worries. Awesome. So it's just one of those things where, you know, I feel, what I was gonna say is just, if I tell the kids, you try to get as much built in your toolbox as you can, so you always can compete in a match.
Totally.
And I have that same terminology when I work with these younger coaches, going, you have these tools already, these skills, whether it's the playing skills or you start learning these things, but now you need more things.
Right.
So I just told myself, the more you just build in, like we were saying earlier, you never know what tool you might need down the road, but you have it. You have the experience or the knowledge that you've acquired by taking these experiences as an example. It helps, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's like for example, like being with Dominic and his team for a week. You know, it was an amazing experience. It was the first time I was ever in Europe, so to go to Austria was an amazing experience for me. Different culture-wise was different. But the thing is, like, you know, one of my dreams always was, if I could make it as a player, I'd love to be on the tour, traveling with players.
Sure.
Now, obviously, my son's younger, but this is something maybe that I might venture in down the road when he's older and he's on his own, that I might venture on and say, hey, I'm going to work part-time, or have like training blocks, you know.
That's sick.
You know, to have people come in and train, or I come to them and train them, you know. I would love to be able to have those opportunities to do that. That's something I'd love to do. But yeah, I mean, as far as the, you know, I think in so many ways being a coach now is so beneficial. With so many things are accessible. Like, I know like with analytics, for example, or like swing vision, I would have been like addicted to that as a kid. I mean, every time I practiced, I don't care if anything, it was even on the ball machine, I would have been putting that thing on. And I would have been like subscribed to so many different things, because there's just so much information that would be actually impactful to changing. Taking so much guesswork out of the way. There, for sure.
100%. And I think the next level of that, and I think I've personally experienced this, kind of being on like the newer generation of things, is the impact of the internet. Because I know, like, when I was coming up, like, I had certain resources that, like, I realize now were so great for me, just based on, like, I could go on YouTube and look up like whatever coaches I was interested in, and I could consume their content. And as a kid in middle school, I could start learning stuff that maybe it was never relevant to me then, but it was just, I was laying bricks, right? I was laying bricks. And now the technology is even getting crazier with when we're talking about like AI and like Chat GPT and like how this is at elementary school kids' fingertips, where any question they can ask, they can literally get information way quicker that's even more advanced than just like Google searches and all that.
Yep.
So I think that I personally benefited like crazy from that. I think that I definitely credit a lot of that for me learning stuff from like some of the top coaches around the world before I was able to be mentored like in person by anybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's awesome because it's like, it's free. Anyone can do it. There's no barriers to that. It just takes someone who genuinely loves the game and is willing to put in some of that legwork of like, well, let me seek out the information first step, right? And I think that that's something that's been instrumental for me in my journey. So I think for, younger coaches, it's like leverage that and just start learning about it, right? Just start learning about it. So when you're ready to make that like next step for you, you've been kind of putting in some of that legwork and it can kind of, it's a free thing that can help you get a way bigger edge on a lot of the competition who might not be doing that, right? Who might not be constantly learning,
Well, I think that's the thing too, is like, for example, I have, staff members who, will, like right now, I have like young coaches, veteran coaches that I've been going on the court and helping one-on-one with their players and stuff like that, or the parents. Like their ability to also be open is so important too, to know that I'm not a threat. I'm not trying to take anyone's student. I've never been that way, but it's like, I'm going there with like, helping with my, like we'll say, like good intentions in my heart is put in to help the player, help the coach become a better coach. Like I told you before when we first talking, it was like, at the end of the day, it's like, if I help you become a better coach, you're going to impact more people than I can by myself.
100%.
And that, but at the same time, that mindset's not always fabricated, because in the way if you think the way club structure is, if you own your own business structure and that, it's not really, it's always about really about, it can be ego driven, like how many players I have, this, that, whatever, where it's like, my mindset changed, I never was that way in the first place, but I think like 15 years ago when first time I got to mentor some younger coaches at my own facility and just saw how much of a difference I was making in them and how much their kids were becoming more successful and happier.
Totally.
I was like, this is just like if one of my kids got better at something, I feel just as proud, even though it's nothing, they're not my kid or not my, so
impact driven.
So I think like really like impacting, I think that more that we have those abilities, like you said, in the internet, the way it is now, it's like I said, I think I would be like an addicted person with that stuff, especially as a player. And then thinking of them going forward into like the coaching standpoint, I think it'd be huge. I guess I got two questions for you on that, because I know you've been asking me all these questions. What are some of the things you learned from Rick and Nick that you could say that were like some defining things you're like, wow, I never thought of that way, or like, this makes so much sense that this really could change kind of my course of what I'm doing?
100%. So one of the first lessons that I learned from Nick Bollettieri, and I'll tell you this story, it was crazy, happened, I would say, 10 to 15 years before I was even coaching at IMG.
Okay.
Well, how the fuck is that possible? How is that? It happened in College Park, Maryland, when I was training there.
JTCC?
At JTCC. Because he came as a guest speaker. And funnily enough, it didn't even have to do with me. He asked my brother to be a guest like player to do a drill that he was demonstrating.
Okay.
And it was a drill. It was a very simple drill, but basically he set a box, a zone, and it was the first time that I ever saw a coach like tracking like a number like within a drill, and like a very simple drill, but just crafting a specific goal. It's a simple drill. It was like a cross-court forehand drill. I think it was like getting 10 in like maybe it was like a 4x4 like cone zone, something like that.
Or something.
And I think the lesson there is obviously like great motivator, very inspiring, all that. But just from a fundamental training conceptual standpoint, understanding that what gets measured gets improved, right? So as a coach, especially when you're early on learning, like there's obviously a lot of stuff that maybe can't be measured when it comes to like fine tuning things, but when it comes to just basic stuff, when you're a young coach hustling, whatever, it's like, okay, the base level, in my opinion, is just start measuring certain things with your students so you can actually see where they're at, right? And actually give them a pathway, say, okay, like this is where we were like when we started, and now you can see verifiably the progress that you've made. So I think just a lesson of like measurement and looking down the line, that was just super impactful for me. So on Nick Bollettieri's side, that's what I would say. And Yeah, I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Totally. And I think when it comes to Rick, I mean, there was a ton that I learned there. I mean, with Rick, that was even a totally different level of relationship, because there I would have access to him all day, basically every day. I could just stand on court next to him, pick his brain with anything, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, Rick is known to be arguably like the best technical coach of all time. I personally believe that. I know that I've learned so much from a technical standpoint from him, biomechanics, not only what the right stuff is, but how to actually apply it with individual athletes, which is like, there's information and there's implementation, right?
Right.
So I was able to learn what I believe is the state of the art, most modern information when it comes to biomechanics, and then learning the art of coaching when it comes to implementing that with athletes. Yep. So there was a lot from like a coaching education standpoint where I feel like I graduated from Mesa University, making that right. Because I was able to learn from him for like 2 years. So first, like the technical side of things, if you're a coach who's trying to learn that stuff, I mean, he's a great resource for that, goated in that regard, in my opinion. And then a lot of the other stuff was just like, for example, I mean, there's so many things. This could be a whole podcast, just lessons I learned from him, 100%. But one thing that comes to my mind that I just understand the importance of is how important instilling like belief in your athletes is.
Yep.
And just like the art of coaching and just literally how to be like a great coach and role model for athletes and like what they need. And I've always been like a very positive person and always have had that energy, but then he really taught me how to kind of instill that in others. And I think, and I'll be curious to know like from your perspective and your journey, but I know like for me, I look back on like whether it was him or other coaches, but when you have someone you look up to who instills that seed of belief that you can be great and you are great and you can really achieve something big, and it's based in a reality, like that is a different level, and you can extract a lot out of athletes with that. And I think he just taught me how to get the most out of a player in just like a very unique, interesting way that I'm just super grateful to learn from him and have him as a mentor. And that's just like scratching the surface. I mean, there's so many different things. Like, I mean, just the technical stuff was insane. Just learning all the technique stuff. I mean, that to me was just like, I just felt like within a few months, I was able to just be on a totally different level. And that's another thing that I would say for young coaches is if you can learn how to like apply really good technique to athletes, that's a very high leverage activity for you as a coach, because in the marketplace, at least from what I've seen, that's a lot of what like people will pay a top dollar for. So if you're trying to build your business and build your coaching skill set, I'm a big proponent of learning those biomechanical things, because that's something that no one can ever take away from you.
Sure.
You could be in a wheelchair tomorrow. Maybe you can't hit with anyone, but now you have that skill set that you'll have forever, and you can translate that on all the athletes you work with. And look, everybody's different. You know, there might be certain things that are different here and there. You don't have to cookie cutter it, but there are principles scientifically that you can apply for everyone, which, I mean, it was just a total game changer for me, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, that would have been a great experience if I was your age to be able to have both those guys. You know, I only had, I remember for me, I wanted to go to the Nick Bollettieri when it was Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy. And parents just could not afford that, back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
This is back in the 90s, this is back when Agassi was training her and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I just remember I used to get flyers from him all the time. But no, it was great. I got to meet him, was it 2020 before COVID hit. And he always been a very high motivator. And I think, with Nick, I mean, I can't speak about Rick, but like just from the books I used to read of Nick's, and that just, if you read the way he writes or whoever wrote for him, and you can see that there's a lot of thought behind meticulous things of everything, that whether it's how you talk to the player, and I think both of those both coaches, from what I can gather and what you expressed, is what I felt, because I feel that's a component that I try to bring to every player, which is what I was saying earlier as we were talking, is that if you can make the player if you see things in the player that they can't see and you get them to see it,
right,
that is such a powerful tool, because it changes their life.
Totally.
Because it's not even just about the game. That belief that you get in them changes, like you could change the trajectory of the rest of their life, you know. And I think that's the thing that I try to always say to parents is like, find a coach that truly cares about your player for the person they are, and they have good intentions and they have the knowledge to really make improvements and understand how, like, what makes your kid tick and how to fix it. And really, you know, like one of the things I've seen over the years, probably in the last 5 to 10 years, is a lot of times, as you know, in many things, not just in tennis, but in many sports where sports related, in that where like everyone's always thinking the grass is greener on the other side, and then they go somewhere. I mean, I had one student, so in my...
Just gonna check on the time. Yeah, keep talking, you're good.
Yeah.
We got like 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
So what I was gonna finish what I was saying was just that, like, you know, I in my first 28 years, I had never like lost a student. Like whenever I started with them, whenever I was 7 years old, 18, they stayed their whole career with me. So I was really grateful for all those students I had. And I had one student who, you know, who another coach, you know, had, we'll say, manipulated them to go over, and I said, okay. And ended up being where, you know, like 6 months later, you know, the dad asked, and I said, no, I didn't have any time. And then it came to a summer, and then finally the daughter came to me and said, can you please take me back? And I did, because it came from her. That's partially 100%. The reason too, it came from her. She's older at this point. She played at Notre Dame, but it was just one of those things where, after that, these past couple of years for me, it's just crazy how instead of working as a team, things can be toxic.
Totally.
Like for me personally, like I share a lot of my students with other coaches, even some of the younger coaches, especially as I made my job change to one to the other. When I went from one working 6 days a week down to like only 2 days a week, and the other one I'm going to, you know, 4.
Sure.
You know, those that were taking multiple lessons a week with me, I'm like, oh, I'll still have you on the weekend, but during the week, I want you to work with so-and-so.
Sure.
And we work together as a team to make sure that your child's still developing.
That's awesome.
So I think that's also the other aspect is the openness, I think, for the new generation or even older generation coaches like myself or even older, to instead of being threatened, to understand that it's just another set of eyes.
Totally. And have an abundance mentality, not a scarcity mindset.
Correct. Absolutely right. So I think that's one thing that I think that as at least here in the States, I think is really something I see a lot is like if I sent one of my kids to you, I'm not afraid.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean? And then it's like, and if they find something and they decide to work with you, the way I look at it, my mindset, this is my mindset, is that whatever time I have with them, I have to be grateful for that time I had with them.
Totally.
And that was what was meant for me, and maybe what lessons they were supposed to learn from me was my time with them.
Totally.
And then whatever I say they went to work with you, they have something else they need to learn from you that maybe I had a different way of doing it, but they're learning it better from you.
100%.
So it's like, at the end of the day, it's what's better for the athlete,
100%.
because it helps them become more successful in tennis, but also in life. So yeah, that's part of my thing. So
that's awesome. That's awesome, man. Yeah, and I think like I want to throw in like one more gold nugget from kind of something I learned from Rick Macy, which was just like something that I learned not from anything he said, but just from, and I think this is really important for coaches to understand too, young, older, whatever, is one thing that Rick did that was just really cool was like, I show up there super early before everyone, whatever, like I see him picking up the trash in the morning. He's cleaning up the facility, right?
That's me and my job.
And you see that you're not too big for any of this stuff, because if you want to, especially the higher up you get in your business, whatever, you have employees, whatever, it's like, even for coaches, like as a player, and this might cut out, but screw it. As a player, it's like, if you want to be a coach who players want to get help from and all that, you got to be, number one, practicing what you preach, and you got to be taking action on like those little things that you can't be too good for the work.
Yep.
You know, and that never stops. So like, especially I would say like with young coaches, and I still think it applies for older coaches, but just from my perspective, is just like, especially when you're younger, lean into what your strengths are, right? You're young, you're probably in like better shape, right? So it's like, you better be in fucking peak condition, you know? Like you better be, you know, taking all the, like you should, I believe you should still be trying to work on your game a little bit, right? And say you don't have the best technique. Well, as a coach, it's great to learn from people and all that, but like when a coach like joins to work with me, I'm like, I'm going to teach you how to do this for yourself as well, because is a player going to listen to you if maybe you don't know how to do it? Like maybe,